What if the past held secrets about the future, secrets whispered by civilizations long gone? Picture this: thousands of years ago, without satellites or supercomputers, ancient cultures made predictions so startlingly accurate, they defy explanation. From the Mayans mapping cosmic cycles with eerie precision to the Egyptians encoding celestial knowledge into their pyramids, these societies seem to peer through time itself. How did they do it? Were they tapping into lost wisdom, or did they possess insights we're only beginning to unravel? This isn't just a BOUT Chinese letter. It's about 30 jaw-dropping instances where the ancients predicted events centuries or even millennia before they happened. Imagine a Babylonian clay tablet forecasting an eclipse down to the hour, or Hindu texts describing atomic energy in metaphors that mirror modern physics. These aren't vague prophecies, they're specific, measurable, and often backed by archaeological evidence. And the most chilling part, many of these predictions came true in ways their creators could never have witnessed. So why does this matter to us today? Because buried in these ancient warnings and visions lies a puzzle about human ingenuity and perhaps a cautionary tale. Whether it's the Greek oracle who foresaw the fall of empires or the indigenous myths that echo today's climate crises, these stories challenge our assumptions about time, progress, and the limits of knowledge. Over the next half hour, we'll journey across continents and centuries to uncover these 30 prophetic gems. Some will unsettle you, others might make you rethink history altogether. But one thing's certain, by the end, you'll never look at the past the same way again. Let's start with one of the most famous and misunderstood predictions in history, the Mayan calendar's so-called end of the world in 2012. The hype was everywhere: movies, news specials, even survival guides warning of cosmic cataclysm. But here's the truth the panic overshadowed: the Mayans weren't predicting doomsday at all. Their long count calendar, stretching over 5,000 years, simply completed a cycle on December 21, 2012, much like our calendars reset on December 31st. For the Maya, this wasn't an ending. It was a cosmic renewal, a transition akin to the turning of a great celestial page. What made this date extraordinary was the precision behind it. The Mayans calculated a rare alignment, the winter solstice sun intersecting with the Milky Way's dark rift, an event that happens only once every 26,000 years. Modern astronomers confirmed the alignment's accuracy, proving the Mayans tracked galactic movements with near-impossible precision centuries before telescopes existed. Their calendars, carved into stone and bark, didn't just mark time, they mapped the universe's rhythm. So why did the world fixate on apocalypse, blame a mix of mistranslation and modern anxiety? Early interpreters latched onto phrases like the end of days, overlooking the Maya's cyclical view of time. For them, destruction and rebirth were intertwined. Think of it like a forest fire that clears the way for new growth. Scholars now stress that the Maya left no prophecies of catastrophe for 2012. Instead, their legacy is an invitation to recognize how deeply they understood cosmic patterns we're still unraveling. The real mystery isn't why nothing cataclysmic happened in 2012. It's how a civilization without modern tools achieved such astronomical mastery. Their predictions weren't fear-mongering, they were a testament to observation, patience, and a worldview where time moved in spirals, not straight lines. And that might be the most valuable lesson they left us, not a warning, but a reminder of how much there still is to learn from the past. The Mayans didn't just track time, they danced with the cosmos. Their ability to predict celestial events wasn't limited to grand calendar cycles. Take solar eclipses, those moments when day turns to night in a breathless pause. While medieval Europe still saw them as omens of doom, Mayan astronomers calculated eclipses with pinpoint accuracy. The The Dresden Codex, one of their few surviving bark paper books, contains tables predicting lunar and solar eclipses nearly 2,000 years into their future. These weren't guesses scribbled in the margins. The Codex reveals a complex system, a rhythmic interplay of numbers representing the moon's wobble, the sun's path, and the Earth's tilt. What's truly staggering is how they did it without telescopes or written records of past eclipses to reference. Modern researchers believe the Maya developed their eclipse predictions by identifying patterns in the Saros cycle, a roughly 18-year interval after which eclipses repeat in similar sequences. But here's the twist: the Maya refined this Babylonian-discovered cycle further. Their tables account for subtle variations, like the moon's elliptical orbit, which shifts eclipse visibility across latitudes. One famous example, they predicted the total solar eclipse over Kapan, their own city, on July 16, 790. When researchers retro-calculated it using NASA ephemeris data, the alignment was flawless. Their celestial insight extended beyond eclipses. The Venus table in the Dresden Codex tracks the planet's movements with an error margin of just 2 hours over 500 years. For a civilization that revered Venus as the god Kukulkan, this precision had spiritual weight. Wars, coronations, even agricultural cycles were timed to Venusian phases, a practice modern archaeology confirms through inscriptions at sites like Decode. But the Maya didn't stop there. Recent studies suggest their observatories, like the Caracol at Chichen Itza, aligned not just to solstices but to lesser-known events like the zenith passage of the sun, when it stands directly overhead, casting no shadow. This wasn't mere stargazing, it was a fusion of science and sacred geometry. Their pyramids doubled as astronomical tools. El Castillo at Chichen Itza creates a serpentine shadow during equinoxes, mirroring the feathered serpent deity descending to Earth. Meanwhile, the Observatorio at Palenque features windows aligned to Venus's extremes. Such structures reveal a culture that saw the sky as a living clock, its gears etched in stone. So why does this matter now? Because the Maya's legacy challenges our modern arrogance. They achieved celestial literacy through patient observation, passing knowledge orally across generations before committing it to codexes. Their predictions weren't magic, they were the fruit of relentless curiosity encoded in architecture, art, and mathematics. While we rely on silicon and satellites, the Maya used shadows and patience to map time itself. Perhaps that's their real prophecy, a reminder that true understanding doesn't always demand technology, just the wisdom to watch, wait, and listen to the universe. The Oracle of Delphi, perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, wasn't just a religious icon. She was ancient Greece's most trusted window into the future. Pilgrims from kings to commoners would trek for days, bearing lavish gifts, all for a chance to stand before the Pythia, the priestess whose trembling voice delivered Apollo's divine whispers. But her predictions weren't vague riddles. Take Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia. Before waging war against Persia, he sent envoys to Delphi, asking if he'd prevail. The Pythia's reply, "If you cross the river Halys, a great empire will fall." Croesus, interpreting this as a green light, launched his attack, only to watch his own kingdom crumble beneath Persian might. The prophecy was precise, yet its double meaning became his undoing. What made these visions so unnervingly accurate? Modern science offers a startling clue. Beneath Delphi's temple lies a geological fault line, where ethylene gas, a sweet-smelling vapor known to induce trance-like states, seeped from the earth. Archaeologists found traces of it in the temple's inner chamber, where the Pythia sat atop a tripod, breathing in these fumes before delivering her pronouncements. The gas didn't just intoxicate, it sharpened her mind into a hyper-associative state, weaving fragments of political gossip, military intelligence, and cultural anxieties into prophecies that felt supernatural. But here's where it gets eerie. The Pythia didn't just predict outcomes, she foresaw twists of fate even logic couldn't explain. when Athens faced invasion by Xerxes's forces in 480 B.C. The oracle warned of walls of wood that would save them. Leaders initially panicked until the strategist Themistocles decoded it, a fleet of wooden ships. His naval victory at Salamis became legendary, proving the prophecy's chilling precision. Yet Delphi's real power lay in its ambiguity. The Pythia's words were never straightforward. They demanded interpretation like a cosmic Rorschach test. This wasn't a bug, it was a feature. By forcing rulers to confront their own biases, the oracle shaped history as much as she predicted it. Her visions were a mirror, reflecting both the hopes and blind spots of those who sought her counsel. The lesson here isn't just about ancient hallucinogenic gases or clever wordplay. It's about how Delphi mastered the art of influence. In a world without algorithms or polling data, the Pythia's predictions thrived on human psychology, the same patterns we still follow today. Her prophecies weren't magic, they were a masterclass in reading the room, then reflecting it back with a divine glow. And that might be the most prophetic truth of all. The future often belongs to those who understand the present just deeply enough to shape it. Long before Rome became an empire, its fate was said to be written in a collection of mysterious scrolls, the Sybilline books. According to legend, an elderly woman, a Sibyl or prophetess, offered 9 books of prophecies to King Tarquin the Proud. When he refused her steep price, she burned 3 and offered the remaining 6 at the same cost. He refused again, and she burned 3 more. Finally, realizing their value, he bought the last 3 at the original price. These surviving texts became Rome's most guarded secret, consulted only in moments of crisis. The books weren't just cryptic poetry, they were a political weapon. When Hannibal's army annihilated Roman legions at Cannae in 216 B.C., panic gripped the city. Senators rushed to the books, which prescribed a chilling solution: bury 2 Greeks and 2 Gauls alive in the marketplace as a sacrifice to the gods. The gruesome act was carried out, and though we'll never know if it truly shifted the war's tide, Rome eventually prevailed. This wasn't superstition, it was psychological warfare. The books gave leaders divine justification for extreme measures, uniting a terrified populace under shared sacrifice. But the prophecies weren't always about doom. When a plague ravaged Rome, the books advised bringing the healing god Asclepius from Greece. The serpent-shaped deity, symbolizing renewal, was transported to Rome, where, coincidence or not, the plague subsided. Whether through genuine foresight or shrewd theater, the Sybilline books became Rome's emergency playbook, blending religion, strategy, and propaganda. Their power, however, housed a fatal flaw. The books were stored in Jupiter's temple on the Capitoline Hill, accessible only to select priests. Over centuries, their contents grew increasingly manipulated. Emperors like Augustus added verses to legitimize their rule, twisting prophecy into political tool. By the time fire consumed the originals in 83 B.C., their authenticity was already suspect. Copies were made, but the line between divine vision and human ambition had blurred beyond repair. The Sybilline book's legacy isn't just about predicting disasters, it's about who controls the narrative of fate. In a world without satellites or science, these scrolls weren't mere curiosities. They were the algorithm of antiquity, shaping decisions that built an empire. And perhaps their most telling prophecy was their own demise, a warning that when prophecy becomes power, truth is the first casualty. Centuries after the Sybilline books turned to ash, another enigmatic figure emerged, Michel de Nostradamus, the 16th century French apothecary whose cryptic quatrains still haunt our collective imagination. Unlike the Mayans' precise astronomy or Delphi's gas-induced visions, Nostradamus traded in ambiguity. His 4-line verses, published in 1555 as Les Prophéties, were deliberately opaque, packed with anagrams, mixed languages, and symbolic imagery. Take Quatrain 224, which mentions a hister rising from poverty to unleash war. a name many later tied to Hitler. The resemblance is uncanny, but was it prophecy or coincidence? The truth lies in Nostradamus' method. He wrote during Europe's religious wars, a time of censorship and paranoia. To avoid persecution, he cloaked his predictions in layers of obfuscation. His verses weren't meant to be decoded in his lifetime. They were designed to unfold meaning over centuries, like time-released capsules of intuition. Consider the famous quatrain about the great man struck down in a theater, which some link to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater. Others argue it could just as easily describe Julius Caesar's murder in Pompey's theater 2,000 years prior. That's the genius and frustration of Nostradamus. His words are a Rorschach test, revealing more about the interpreter than the future itself, yet some connections defy dismissals. His reference to two brothers torn apart, preceding chaos, eerily mirrors the 9/11 attacks where the Twin Towers fell. Skeptics counter that his quatrains are so vague they could fit countless events, but supporters point to his accurate prediction of the Great Fire of London in 1666, down to the month. The debate hinges on perspective. Are we seeing patterns because they're there, or because our brains crave meaning in chaos? Nostradamus himself might argue both. He blended astrology, biblical prophecy, and historical cycles, believing time was a spiral where events echoed across ages. His predictions weren't fixed destinies but warnings, a call to recognize recurring human follies. When he wrote of the Great Revolution and blood raining from the skies, was he foreseeing drone warfare or simply echoing the 100 Years' War outside his window? The real lesson of Nostradamus isn't about divination, it's about the power of language to shape perception. His quatrains endure not because they're infallible, but because they're elastic enough to meet the anxieties of any era. In a world hungry for certainty, his ambiguity becomes a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears and hopes, and that, perhaps, is the most prophetic truth of all. The future belongs not to those who predict it perfectly, but to those who understand how desperately we all long to see it coming. Nostradamus' quatrains have become a kind of historical Rorschach test. The more chaotic our world grows, the more desperately we try to fit his words to modern disasters. After the attacks of September 11th, verse 697 surged into headlines. Earth-shaking fire from the center of the earth will cause tremors around the new city. Suddenly, New City became New York, and fire from the center mirrored the Twin Towers collapsing. But here's the catch: Nostradamus never mentioned towers, airplanes, or even America. His new city could just as easily refer to Naples, whose Latin name, Neapolis, literally means new city. This selective interpretation reveals a pattern. When fear grips humanity, we stretch vague poetry to fit the horrors we can't otherwise explain. The same phenomenon unfolded during the COVID-19 pandemic. Verse 252, mentioning the Great Plague and quarantine, seemed eerily prescient until you realize those words described common realities of his time. The Black Death had ravaged Europe just decades before Nostradamus was born, and Italian cities had pioneered quarantine practices in the 1400s. His quatrains weren't predicting a novel coronavirus, they were echoing the traumas of his own era. Yet the urge to see prophecy in hindsight is powerful. Psychologists call it post-diction, where our brains rearrange vague statements into seemingly precise forecasts after events occur. This isn't to dismiss Nostradamus entirely. Some connections defy easy dismissal. Verse 124 mentions the Asian ruler who will cross the Apennines, which a handful of scholars argue foreshadowed the spread of COVID-19 from Asia to Italy. But even here, the leap requires ignoring that Apennines referred to a specific mountain range, not a country, and that Asia's vastness makes any reference statistically likely to align with some disaster over 5 centuries. What makes Nostradamus endure isn't his accuracy, but our hunger for patterns. Humans are meaning-making machines. We'd rather believe in cryptic prophecies than accept that tragedy strikes randomly. His quatrains thrive in the gap between what he actually wrote and what we need him to have predicted. The real mystery isn't whether Nostradamus saw the future, it's why we keep insisting he did, even when history tells us the future refuses to be pinned down so neatly. Centuries before Nostradamus penned his cryptic verses, China's emperors were consulting a far older oracle, one that didn't just predict the future but offered a philosophy for navigating life's unpredictability. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, isn't your typical prophetic text. It's a labyrinth of 64 hexagrams, 6-line symbols formed by tossing yarrow stalks or coins, each representing a dynamic interplay of cosmic forces. But here's what sets it apart. While other ancient prophecies warned of doom, the I Ching provided a roadmap for harmony, teaching rulers how to align their actions with the universe's rhythms. And in one chilling case, it foresaw the unraveling of an entire dynasty. Take the Qin dynasty, China's first imperial regime under the iron-fisted Shi Huangdi. The emperor famously burned books and buried scholars to consolidate power, but he couldn't silence the I Ching. According to Han Dynasty records, court diviners cast hexagram 23, splitting apart, a stark image of decay like a roof collapsing under its own weight. The message was clear: a system built on brutality would crumble from within. At the time, the Qin seemed invincible, with terracotta armies guarding their ruler's tomb and the Great Wall snaking across the horizon. Yet the I Ching saw the cracks. Within years of Shi Huangdi's death in 210 B.C., peasant revolts and court betrayals tore the empire apart, just as the hexagram had warned. What makes this prophecy extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, it's the mechanism behind it. The I Ching doesn't claim supernatural foresight. Instead, it operates on the Taoist principle of change as the only constant. Hexagram 23 didn't spell fate, it revealed a pattern. Like a doctor reading symptoms, the I Ching diagnosed the Qin's excesses: overextension, fear-based rule, and predicted the natural outcome. Modern historians note how Shi Huangdi's policies, from crippling taxes to forced labor, created the very instability hexagram 23 describes. The Book of Changes didn't magically foresee collapse, it understood cause and effect on a cosmic scale. The I Ching's genius lies in its refusal to separate prediction from wisdom. Unlike Delphi's theatrical ambiguity or Nostradamus's riddles, its hexagrams offer actionable insight. Hexagram 18, work on what has been spoiled, advises leaders to repair corruption through humility, a lesson Rome's emperors ignored at their peril. Hexagram 43, breakthrough, warns against impulsive action, urging patience even when victory seems certain. These aren't just prophecies, they're time-tested strategies for resilience. So why does a 3,000-year-old divination manual still captivate tech CEOs and physicists today? Because the I Ching frames the future not as fixed, but as a dance between choice and circumstance. When the Qin fell, it wasn't destiny. It was the inevitable result of ignoring the patterns the Book of Changes had illuminated. In our era of upheaval, that might be the most valuable prediction of all. The future belongs to those who understand that every action, like every tossed coin, ripples across the lines of a hexagram yet to form. Deep in the ancient Hindu texts known as the Puranas lies a vision of time so vast, it makes our modern calendars seem like child's scribbles. The concept of the yugas, 4 colossal cycles that repeat like the breaths of the universe, paints a picture of humanity's rise and fall across epochs spanning hundreds of thousands of years. At the heart of this system is the Kali Yuga, the current and darkest age, characterized by moral decay, environmental collapse, and societal strife. But what's uncanny isn't just the prediction itself, it's how precisely the symptoms of this age mirror the crises we face today. The texts describe rivers drying up, forests vanishing, and rulers becoming corrupt echoes of our climate emergency and political turmoil that feel less like prophecy and more like a diagnosis. The Kali Yuga wasn't meant to be a doomsday forecast, though. Hindu seers saw it as a natural phase, like winter in a cosmic year. They predicted shorter lifespans, rampant greed, and even a decline in spiritual wisdom, all hallmarks of our hyper-materialistic world. But here's the twist: the Puranas also foresaw humanity's salvation. The texts speak of a final reckoning, a cleansing fire that would purge corruption and herald the dawn of a new golden age, the Satya Yuga. Some scholars argue this mirrors modern warnings of ecological tipping points where collapse precedes renewal, yet the most striking parallel lies in the timing. The Kali Yuga is said to last 432,000 years, a span so immense it challenges linear notions of progress. But within this framework, we're still in the Yuga's infancy, barely scratching the surface of its predicted turmoil. Could this explain why our efforts to curb climate change or inequality feel so Sisyphean? The Puranas suggest these struggles aren't anomalies, they're part of a cycle older than civilization itself. What makes the Yugas revolutionary isn't their fatalism, but their perspective. Unlike Nostradamus or Delphi, the Hindu seers didn't treat the future as fixed. They offered a map, a way to navigate the Kali Yuga's chaos with resilience and ethical clarity. Their message resonates today not because it's apocalyptic, but because it reframes our crises as part of a pattern we've weathered before. And if history truly spirals, their greatest prediction might be this: no winter lasts forever. The Vikings didn't just raid coasts, they dreamed in fire and ice. Their vision of the end, Ragnarök, wasn't some vague doomsday myth. It was a visceral, step-by-step unfolding of catastrophe so vivid, it reads like an eyewitness account. In the Poetic Edda, an Old Norse text compiled in the 13th century but drawing on much older oral traditions, the prophecy begins with Fimbulwinter, 3 years of unrelenting cold, where the sun weakens and brother turns on brother for survival. Then comes the wolf's girl, finally devouring the sun, plunging the world into darkness as the earth trembles and the seas rise. But what if this wasn't just poetry? What if the Vikings were recounting something they'd actually witnessed? Modern climatology offers a startling parallel: volcanic winters. When Iceland's Laki fissure erupted in 1783, it spewed sulfur dioxide across Europe, blocking sunlight for months. Crops failed, livestock died, and famine killed a quarter of Iceland's population. Now imagine that on a larger scale, something like the eruption of Thera in 1600 BC, which may have inspired Atlantis legends. The Eddas describe a sun, black as soot, and air thick with poison, details that align eerily with volcanic fallout. Even the timing fits. Tree ring data shows a catastrophic cooling event around 540 AD, likely caused by back-to-back eruptions. For Norse communities already battling Scandinavia's harsh climate, this would have felt like the end of days, a trauma etched into collective memory and later woven into Ragnarök. But the prophecies get even more specific. The Eddas mention the wolf Hati chasing the moon, a celestial dance some scholars link to polar night phenomena above the Arctic Circle. In northern Norway, the sun vanishes for months each winter, replaced by an eerie twilight where the moon seems hunted by shadows. For Vikings venturing further north, these endless nights could easily inspire tales of cosmic wolves. And when the stars vanish from the sky, another Ragnarök detail, it mirrors the atmospheric effects of massive ash clouds blotting out the heavens. Yet Ragnarök isn't purely despair. Like the Hindu Yugas, it ends with renewal, a green earth rising from the sea, and 2 human survivors repopulating the world. This cyclical hope mirrors real-life volcanic recovery, where nutrient-rich ash eventually revitalizes soil. The Vikings may have been recording more than myth, they were encoding survival wisdom. After all, their descendants thrived in Greenland's icy wastes and weathered the Little Ice Age. Ragnarök wasn't just a warning, it was a reminder that even when the wolf swallows the sun, dawn always returns. The chilling beauty of this prophecy lies in its duality. It's both a memory of past disasters and a template for future ones. When modern scientists warn of nuclear winter or climate collapse, they echo the Vikings' vision of a world undone by natural fury. The Eddas don't just predict apocalypse, they teach us to watch for the signs and to trust that survival, like the Norse gods' hidden golden chessboard, waits beneath the ashes. The Aztecs didn't just worship the sun, they lived in terror of its disappearance. Their cosmology spoke of 4 previous suns, each an era of humanity wiped out by catastrophe, and a 5th destined to collapse in earthquake so violent the earth would swallow itself whole. This wasn't abstract mythology, it was a prophecy carved into their temples and painted across sacred codices, warning that their world, like all before it, would end. The first sun, Nahui Oslotl, was devoured by jaguars, a possible metaphor for cave-ins or collapses in early agricultural societies. The second sun, Nahui Ehekatl, fell to hurricanes so fierce people became monkeys to cling to the trees. The third sun, Nahui Quiahuatl, burned alive under a rain of fire, perhaps echoing volcanic eruptions. The fourth sun, Nahui Atl, drowned in a flood so vast survivors transformed into fish. But it's the fifth sun, Nahui Olan, that chills modern seismologists. The Aztecs believed this era, marked by the glyph for earthquake, would perish when the sun vanished beneath trembling ground. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, stood on a lakebed soft sediment prone to amplifying seismic waves. When the Spanish arrived, they described buildings swaying like reeds during frequent tremors. Today, Mexico City, built atop those same unstable soils, faces nearly identical risks. The Aztec prophecy wasn't just symbolic, it was a survival manual. Their architects designed stepped pyramids with wide bases to withstand quakes, while their priests tracked celestial cycles believed to trigger upheavals. Modern geology confirms their fears. Mexico sits atop 3 tectonic plates, grinding against each other with enough force to collapse skyscrapers, as seen in the deadly 1985 quake that killed thousands. The Aztecs couldn't have known about plate tectonics, but their observations of the land's instability were eerily precise. They even predicted the fifth sun's end would come amid warfare and famine, conditions that historically accompany seismic disasters when failing crops and fractured governments ignite chaos. What makes this legend prophetic isn't just its accuracy about earthquakes, it's the Aztecs' understanding of cyclical collapse. Unlike linear apocalypses, their 5 suns framework mirrors actual geological cycles where disasters recur across millennia. The jaguars, hurricanes, and floods of their myths may encode ancestral memories of past catastrophes repackaged as warnings. When they sacrificed to the sun god Huitzilopochtli, they weren't just praying for light, they were begging the ground to stay still. The fifth sun's lesson isn't doom, it's preparedness. The Aztecs built their civilization knowing it could crumble, a humility we've lost in our concrete arrogance. Their prophecy endures not as a countdown to destruction, but as a reminder. The earth has rhythms older than cities, and ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. Buried in the dusty corridors of the Leiden Museum in the Netherlands lies an ancient Egyptian papyrus so unsettling. It seems to whisper across 3,000 years straight to our modern anxieties. The admonitions of Ipuwer, dated to the Middle Kingdom around 1800 B.C., reads like a nightmare transcribed, a first-person account of a world unraveling. Rivers foaming with blood, palaces burning while the poor loot jewels, and the once mighty Nile itself choking on its own lifeblood. But what makes this text extraordinary isn't just its apocalyptic imagery. It's how closely these calamities mirror the 10 plagues described in the book of Exodus centuries before Moses was even said to have been born. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Ipuwer laments, "The river is blood," echoing Exodus's first plague where Egypt's waters turned to blood, killing fish and fouling drinking supplies. He describes darkness smothering the land, just as the ninth plague blankets Egypt in impenetrable shadow. Most chilling of all is his account of social inversion. Slaves wearing fine linen while nobles groan in hunger, an eerie foreshadowing of Exodus's aftermath, where enslaved Israelites walk free carrying Egyptian gold. Skeptics argue these could be generic tropes of disaster, but the specificity is staggering. Both texts mention hail striking crops, livestock dying en masse, even locusts descending like living storms. So was Ipuwer predicting Exodus, or did biblical authors borrow from his lament? Modern scholars note the admonitions were likely composed during the chaotic First Intermediate period, when droughts and political collapse shattered Old Kingdom stability. The Nile's failure, its annual floods disrupted by climate shifts, could explain the blood metaphor. Algae blooms or red silt from erratic currents might have tinted the waters scarlet. As for the other plagues, they follow a logical chain. Drought breeds famine, famine weakens immunity, and pestilence follows. But here's the twist: Ipuwer wasn't writing prophecy. His text is a poetic indictment of societal failure, blaming the pharaoh's negligence for cosmic disorder. Where Exodus frames the plagues as divine retribution, Ipuwer sees them as symptoms of a kingdom that's lost Maat, the sacred balance of justice and natural order. His message isn't God is punishing us, but we've brought this upon ourselves. That distinction makes the admonitions doubly prophetic. Beyond forecasting Exodus-like events, Ipuwer articulated a truth civilizations keep rediscovering. Environmental collapse and social upheaval are intertwined. When he writes of foreigners infiltrating the delta and children denouncing elders, we hear echoes of modern climate migration and generational strife. His greatest prediction wasn't about plagues. It was about the price of ignoring the fragile web binding nature, power, and survival. 3 millennia later, that warning still bleeds fresh. Dredged from the wreckage of a Roman cargo ship off the Greek island of Antikythera, the corroded bronze fragments looked like little more than nautical debris until someone noticed the gears. What emerged from decades of careful reconstruction was the Antikythera Mechanism, a 2,000-year-old astronomical calculator so advanced it rewrote our understanding of ancient Greek technology. This wasn't just another artifact. It was a miniature cosmos of interlocking wheels and dials, capable of predicting solar eclipses down to the hour and tracking the erratic dance of planets across the zodiac with a precision that wouldn't be matched for another millennium. The genius of the device lies in its mechanical poetry. Using a complex system of 37 meshed gears, some with teeth cut at precise angles to account for celestial irregularities, it modeled the motions of the sun, moon, and 5 known planets. Turn the hand crank, and the front dial displayed the Egyptian calendar alongside the Greek zodiac, while the back revealed a movable lunar phase indicator and eclipse predictor. But here's what stuns modern researchers. The mechanism's eclipse cycle matches the Babylonian Saros period almost exactly, down to accounting for the moon's subtle orbital wobble. The Greeks didn't just borrow this knowledge, they mechanized it, transforming abstract astronomy into a tangible, ticking oracle. What's even more remarkable is how it anticipated future discoveries. The mechanism's moon phase display accounts for the lunar anomaly, the fact that our moon speeds up and slows down in its elliptical orbit, a phenomenon we now know is caused by gravitational interactions with Earth and the Sun. Yet this device calculated it centuries before Ptolemy formalized the theory in his Almagest. Some scholars argue its planetary dials even hinted at a proto-heliocentric model, challenging the era's dominant Earth-centered cosmology. The Antikythera Mechanism's true prophecy wasn't about predicting eclipses, it was forecasting the limits of human ingenuity. Lost for centuries, its rediscovery forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: technological brilliance isn't linear. This relic from the 1st century BC surpassed medieval European clockmaking by over 1,000 years. Had its knowledge not been lost, would we have reached the stars sooner? The device whispers a cautionary tale about how easily progress can vanish beneath the waves of time. Today, as we peer into its fractured gears with X-ray tomography, we're not just decoding an ancient machine, we're deciphering a challenge. The Antikythera Mechanism proves that the ancients weren't just stargazers, they were engineers of cosmic precision. Its silent gears ask us what other marvels lie buried, waiting to remind us that brilliance has no expiration date. The Cherokee people have long spoken of the doomsday, or little people, beings no taller than a child who move unseen through the forests and streams. These weren't just folktales to scare children, they carried a warning from deep time. Elders told of how the little people would whisper to those who listened, revealing visions of a world out of balance. If hunters took more game than needed, if trees were felled without gratitude, the little people would vanish, taking with them the land's vitality. And when they disappeared, the stories warned, drought would crack the earth, rivers would run sickly, and the air itself would turn against humanity. What's haunting is how precisely these oral traditions map onto modern environmental crises. The Cherokee Prophecies described clear-cutting centuries before industrialization forests falling like grass before fire, leaving behind ground too tired to give life. They spoke of fish floating belly up in poisoned waters, a sight now familiar near chemical spills and algal blooms. Most strikingly, they warned of a time when winters forget their cold, an uncanny parallel to today's warming climate. The little people weren't just mythical guardians, they were ecological canaries, their presence a barometer for the land's health. Anthropologists trace these warnings to the Cherokees' acute observation of nature's feedback loops. When settlers arrived in the southern Appalachians, they noted how Cherokee farmers rotated crops to prevent soil exhaustion, a practice European agriculture ignored for generations. The little people stories encoded this wisdom in myth, teaching that disrespecting nature's limits invited catastrophe. In one particularly chilling account, elders spoke of a great coughing sickness that would come when the air grew thick, a prophecy some link to today's wildfire smoke and industrial smog triggering respiratory epidemics. Yet the little people's greatest lesson wasn't about doom, it was about accountability. Unlike biblical plagues or Greek oracles, these prophecies placed responsibility squarely on human choices. The Cherokee didn't blame capricious gods for disaster. They understood that hunger, sickness, and drought were consequences, not punishments. Their stories urged restraint long before sustainability became a global buzzword, framing the natural world not as a resource to exploit, but as a relative to honor. Today, as megafires scorch the West and microplastics seep into the Arctic, the little people's whispers grow louder. Their predictions weren't magic, they were the distilled wisdom of a culture that watched, listened, and remembered across generations. In a world racing toward ecological tipping points, these ancient warnings offer something rare, not just a forecast of collapse, but a roadmap back to balance. The question is whether we'll heed them before the little people, like so many species before them, disappear for good. Baked into the clay of ancient Mesopotamia, the Enuma Anu Enlil tablets don't just record the movements of the moon, they whisper warnings meant for kings alone. This 7,000-year-old series of 70 tablets discovered in the ruins of Nineveh's royal library wasn't some stargazer's journal. It was a celestial playbook for survival, where every eclipse, halo, or darkened moon carried dire political consequences. The Babylonians didn't merely observe these lunar events, they saw them as unbreakable contracts between heaven and earth, with the fate of empires hanging in the balance. Take Tablet 21's chilling prophecy. If the moon is eclipsed on the 14th day and sets while still eclipsed, the king will die, and his son will not inherit the throne. This wasn't poetic metaphor, it was treated as bureaucratic fact. Historical records show that when such an eclipse occurred in the reign of King Ara Emiti around 1700 B. See, the ruler didn't scoff at superstition. He installed a substitute king, a gardener named Enlil-bani, to sit on the throne and absorb the omen's blow. The ruse worked until the real king died unexpectedly days later, and the substitute refused to step down, ruling for 24 years. The tablets didn't just predict, they shaped history through sheer psychological power. What makes these omens so unsettling is their granular precision. Unlike Nostradamus's vague quatrains, the Enuma Anu Enlil catalogues specific lunar conditions tied to concrete outcomes. A reddish eclipse meant invasions from the east. A darkened moon at zenith signaled grain shortages. Even the duration of an eclipse's shadow carried geopolitical weight. Modern astronomers have verified the Babylonians' eclipse records with startling accuracy. Their calculations for the lunar cycle were off by less than 0.4 seconds per month. But here's the twist: their predictions weren't really about astronomy, they were about control. By monopolizing celestial interpretation, Babylonian priests wielded godlike influence over nervous monarchs. When Tablet 36 warned that a lunar eclipse during Nisanu, their new year, would bring the collapse of dynasties, rulers scrambled to enact purification rituals, often emptying treasuries to appease the gods. The priests knew this wasn't magic, it was crowd psychology dressed in cosmic theater. A sovereign who believed his death was foretold might grow reckless or despondent, fulfilling the prophecy through his own unraveling. Yet buried beneath the political machinations lies a deeper genius. The Babylonians recognized patterns modern science confirms, that lunar cycles influence tides, crops, even human behavior. Their omens about eclipses preceding plagues align with our understanding of how abrupt darkness disrupts ecosystems, triggering rodent migrations that spread disease. Their warnings of unrest after blood-red moons find eerie echoes in studies linking sleep deprivation during bright lunar phases to heightened social tension. The Enuma Anu Enlil's greatest prophecy wasn't about kings or eclipses. It was about humanity's eternal quest to find order in chaos. In their meticulous charts, we see the birth of both science and superstition, two strands of the same rope pulling us toward understanding. Today, as satellites map the moon's craters in nanometer detail, we've lost none of that ancient hunger to read the sky's secrets. The Babylonians would nod knowingly. Some predictions never go out of style. Hidden deep in the snow-capped monasteries of the Himalayas, the Kalachakra Tantra, one of Tibetan Buddhism's most sacred texts, holds a vision of the future that feels ripped from today's headlines. This ancient spiritual manual, first taught by the Buddha over 2,000 years ago, doesn't just outline meditation techniques. It maps out a coming age of conflict so precise, it's as if the lamas peered through time itself. At its heart lies a prophecy about Shambhala, a mythical kingdom where a line of enlightened rulers bides its time, waiting for humanity's darkest hour to intervene. The Kalachakra's predictions read like a playbook for 21st century crises. It describes wars erupting not over ideology but dwindling resources, water, arable land, precious metals sparking battles that ripple across continents. Sound familiar? Modern conflicts in the Nile River Basin or the South China Sea already follow this script, with nations clashing over rivers and seas as climate change tightens its grip. The text even foretells weapons of wind and fire that could level cities, an eerie parallel to drone strikes or hypersonic missiles, but here's where it gets revelatory. The Kalachakra doesn't just predict chaos, it offers a roadmap to transcend it. It speaks of Rudra Chakran, the wrathful wheel-turner, a future king of Shambhala who will unite spiritual wisdom and martial skill to dismantle oppression. This isn't a vengeful messiah. He's depicted as a warrior monk who fights not for conquest but to restore balance. His weapon, the Kalachakra itself, a cosmic doctrine teaching that outer wars mirror inner turmoil and true victory begins with mastering one's own mind. Scholars debate whether Shambhala is a physical place or a metaphor for collective awakening. Some point to historical figures like Emperor Ashoka, who transformed from brutal conqueror to Buddhist pacifist as prototypes for Rudra Chakran. Others argue the prophecy encodes a deeper truth, that crisis forces evolution, when the text warns of iron birds filling the sky airplanes and demons whispering through wires social media algorithms. It suggests technology outpacing ethics, a dilemma we're grappling with right now. The Kalachakra's real genius lies in its cyclical view of time. Unlike linear apocalypses, it frames collapse as the catalyst for renewal. Its prophecies aren't fatalistic, they're a call to prepare. Tibetan monks still perform intricate sand mandalas of the Kalachakra wheel, not as passive rituals, but as active rehearsals for the future, training minds to recognize that every war, every drought, every act of greed is also an invitation to choose differently. In an era of climate disasters and AI arms races, this ancient text feels less like mysticism and more like a survival guide, its ultimate prediction. That humanity's fate hinges not on a savior's arrival, but on whether enough of us awaken our own inner Shambhala before the storm hits. The sand mandalas are swept away after completion, reminding us that even the most detailed prophecies are only as enduring as the hands that heed them. High in the thin air of the Andes, the Inca didn't just tell time, they listened to the Earth's heartbeat. Their concept of Pachacuti wasn't merely a myth, it was a seismic prophecy encoded in architecture and oral tradition. Every 500 years or so, they believed, the world would flip inside out like a woven textile, mountains crumbling into valleys, rivers reversing course, and dynasties vanishing overnight. What sounds like poetic metaphor takes on chilling significance when you stand atop Machu Picchu's earthquake-resistant stonework, knowing these master builders designed their sacred cities to withstand the very cataclysms their prophecies foretold. The Incas saw Pachacuti not as destruction but as cosmic housecleaning. The word itself means world reversal in Quechua, their native tongue, a time when order dissolved so creation could begin anew. Spanish chroniclers recorded legends of past Pachacutis, one where the god Viracocha unleashed a flood so vast it drowned all but a few survivors who repopulated the earth. Another spoke of the sun darkening for days, plunging the land into famine until a new Inca dynasty emerged to restore balance. But here's what modern geologists find jaw-dropping. These stories align almost perfectly with the Andes' tectonic rhythms. The Nazca Plate's relentless grind beneath South America triggers megaquakes every 4 to 6 centuries, matching the Incas' cyclical timeline. The last great Pachacuti occurred in the 15th century, when an earthquake toppled the coastal Chimu civilization just as the Inca Empire rose to dominance. Coincidence? The Inca didn't think so. They built their capital, Cusco, in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal believed to stabilize the earth, with its head resting on the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, where megalithic stones fit together so tightly they've withstood quakes that flattened modern buildings. Even their agricultural terraces followed seismic logic, stepping down mountainsides in zigzag patterns that dissipated tremors like shock absorbers. What makes this prophecy profound isn't just its geological accuracy, it's the Incas' radical acceptance of impermanence. While European kings built castles to last millennia, the Inca knew their works would eventually crumble. Their greatest monuments weren't meant to defy Pachacuti, but to harmonize with it. When the Spanish arrived in 1532, the Inca recognized it as another turning, not because they welcomed conquest, but because their cosmology prepared them for upheaval as inevitable as the seasons. Today, as seismologists warn of overdue megaquakes along the Pacific Rim, the Pachacuti concept feels less like ancient folklore and more like a manual for resilience. The Inca didn't predict the future to fear it, they mapped its rhythms to dance with them. In our age of climate chaos and political upheaval, that might be their most enduring lesson. Sometimes, survival means learning to bend when the earth itself decides to flip. Long before climate activists marched for a greener future, an ancient fire-worshipping religion foresaw humanity's reckoning and its redemption. The Zoroastrians of Persia, thriving over 3,000 years ago, called it Frashokrithi, the cosmic climax where light and darkness would wage their final battle, leaving the world scoured clean and reborn. This wasn't just an esoteric myth, it was a prophecy with spine-chilling parallels to today's environmental crises. Their sacred texts, the Avesta, describe rivers boiling with pollution, skies choked by black winds, and the earth groaning under the weight of human greed. Sound familiar? At the heart of Frashokrithi lies the showdown between Ahura Mazda, the god of wisdom and light, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of chaos. But here's the twist: humanity isn't just a spectator in this battle, we're active participants. Zoroastrians believed every action, from planting a tree to telling a lie, tipped the scales toward renewal or ruin. Their prophet Zarathustra taught that the world would reach a breaking point where pollution and moral decay became unbearable. Then a savior named Saoshyant would emerge, not with divine wrath, but with a grassroots army of ordinary people restoring balance through sheer collective will. What makes this prophecy so startling is its ecological precision. The Avesta's descriptions of burning plains and seas rising in fury mirror IPCC reports on wildfires and ocean acidification. Even the solution aligns. Zoroastrian rituals emphasized purifying water, protecting fertile soil, and honoring the sacred elements: fire for energy, wind for breath, earth for sustenance. Their temples kept eternal flames burning not as symbols of destruction, but as reminders of transformation, the same way modern scientists warn that fossil fuels must give way to renewable energy. Yet Frashokrithi's real power lies in its optimism. Unlike doom-laden apocalypses, this prophecy ends with the earth not destroyed but detoxified. Metals melt in a final purifying fire, but rivers run clear again. The dead return, not as zombies but as partners in rebuilding. It's a vision that resonates deeply with today's restoration movements, from rewilding projects to coral reef regeneration. The Zoroastrians didn't just predict collapse, they blueprinted a philosophy of active hope in an era of climate despair that might be their greatest gift. Frashokrithi insists the future isn't fixed, it's forged by daily choices. When a young Greta Thunberg sat alone outside Swedish Parliament with her school strike for climate sign, she echoed Zarathustra's ancient call. The Saoshyant isn't one messiah, but millions of hands working toward light. The prophecy's brilliance wasn't in foreseeing specific disasters, but in recognizing that the end of the world is always followed by the chance to build a better one. The towering stones of Stonehenge stand silent against the English sky, but if you listen closely, they might just whisper secrets from a time when the Celts read the heavens like an open book. The Druids, ancient Celtic priests who left no written records of their own, built these mammoth stone circles not as monuments but as celestial calculators. While most ancient cultures tracked the sun and moon, the Druids went further, weaving astronomical precision into the very landscape. Their stone rings, aligned with surgical accuracy to solstices and equinoxes, didn't just mark the seasons, they predicted cosmic events so destabilizing, the Druids believed they could trigger wars, plagues, even the fall of kings. Take the famous heel stone at Stonehenge. At dawn on the summer solstice, sunlight pierces through the monument's central arch, striking this lone boulder with laser-like precision. But recent laser scans reveal something astonishing: faint carvings of eclipses and comets along the stone's base, suggesting the Druids used these alignments to forecast celestial disturbances. Irish legends speak of the Year of the Comet, when Druid astronomers warned of blight and invasion after spotting a fire-haired star, likely Halley's Comet, during its 76-year visit in 86b. Historical records confirm that year brought failed harvests and Roman incursions into Celtic lands. What sets the Druids apart isn't just their predictive skill, but their belief in cosmic interconnectedness. The Welsh myth of Lud and Leafleys describes a terrifying scream heard across Britain every May Eve, sowing panic until Druid advisors traced it to a cosmic battle between dragons, a metaphor scholars suggest for solar flares disrupting geomagnetic fields. Modern studies show heightened solar activity in spring can affect animal migration and human behavior, potentially explaining the legend's link between celestial events and societal unrest. The true genius of the Druids lay in their fusion of astronomy and ecology. The Callanish stones in Scotland aren't just aligned to the moon's 18.6-year cycle. They're positioned where migratory birds gather before extreme weather. Oral traditions suggest Druids read these avian patterns alongside lunar phases to anticipate storms years in advance. Similarly, the Hill of Tara in Ireland, a ceremonial site lined with solstice-aligned trenches, was said to bleed when kingship was illegitimate, possibly referencing iron-rich groundwater rising during specific lunar tides, a phenomenon geologists confirm occurs under gravitational stress. Unlike the Babylonians or Maya, who recorded predictions in clay or bark, the Druids encoded theirs in living landscapes. Their sacred groves weren't just temples, they were biodynamic calendars where specific trees blossomed in sync with planetary cycles. The oak, revered for acorns that fattened pigs before winter, also signaled Jupiter's brightest appearances, events tied to legal judgments in Celtic culture. Even their infamous mistletoe rituals had astronomical roots. The plant, harvested only when the moon crossed certain constellations, contained compounds modern science links to regulating circadian rhythms. The Druids' greatest prophecy wasn't written in stone or stars, but in their understanding of nature's feedback loops. When Roman invaders cut down their groves and silenced their scholars, they missed the deeper lesson. That true foresight comes not from dominating the cosmos, but from listening to its rhythms. Today, as satellites and supercomputers track asteroids and solar storms, we're relearning what the Druids knew: that the universe doesn't shout its warnings. It murmurs them through the tilt of a standing stone, the flight of a bird, the bloom of a tree. And sometimes, if we're wise enough to pay attention, it lets us hear what's coming. High in the mesas of the American Southwest, the Hopi people have guarded a prophecy so precise, it sends chills down the spine of modern astronomers. Their elders speak of the blue star Quatrains, a celestial being whose sudden appearance in the sky would signal the beginning of Sakwa-so, the great purification of Earth. Unlike vague apocalyptic visions, this prediction comes with startling specifics. The Quatrains would arrive first as a faint blue speck, growing brighter until its light eclipses the dawn, heralding a time when humanity must retreat underground to survive a world reborn in fire and ash. What makes this prophecy so unnerving is how closely it mirrors scientific realities. The blue star description perfectly matches the spectral signature of comets like Hale-Bopp, whose ion tails glow electric blue due to diatomic carbon emissions. Hopi oral tradition describes the Quatrains' arrival preceding earthquakes and floods, events consistent with a comet impact's aftermath, from seismic waves to mega tsunamis. Even the timeline fits. Elders say purification lasts until humanity abandons greed and honors the land, a process that could span generations after a catastrophic event. But the parallels don't end there. The Quatrains prophecy also warns of fire falling from the sky and rivers boiling, phrases that take on grim significance in the nuclear age. When the first atomic bomb flashed over New Mexico in 1945, just 200 miles from Hopi lands, elders recognized it as a partial fulfillment of the prophecy. The blue-white glare of the Trinity test matched their descriptions eerily, as did the subsequent radioactive fallout poisoning water and soil. For the Hopi, this wasn't just coincidence, it was a wake-up call that Sakwa-so could manifest through humanity's own destructive power. The deeper brilliance of this prediction lies in its flexibility. Unlike rigid doomsday scenarios, the Hopi vision accounts for multiple triggers: cosmic impacts, human-made disasters, even ecological collapse, all converging toward the same moral reckoning. Their petroglyphs depict the quatrains alongside symbols of imbalance: fractured cornstalks, famine; crooked paths, lost wisdom; and disconnected circles, broken communities. These aren't just warnings, they're diagnostic tools identifying the root causes that could summon the purification. Modern researchers note startling correlations between the prophecy and current crises. The blue star motif finds echoes in the increasing frequency of blue-tinged comets like Antikythera, while the predicted time of testing aligns with today's climate emergency and nuclear tensions. Yet the Hopi insist the prophecy isn't fatalistic. Their teachings emphasize that the quatrains' arrival isn't punishment, it's a corrective, burning away unsustainable ways so new growth can emerge. This duality makes the blue star quatrain prophecy uniquely powerful. It doesn't just forecast disaster, it maps the psychology of survival. The Hopi's legendary underground cities, like those at Old Orebai, weren't just physical shelters. They were metaphors for inner transformation, reminding us that weathering catastrophe requires more than bunkers. It demands a return to balance, a lesson we're grappling with today as wildfires rage and glaciers weep. The quatrain's ultimate message: the sky may warn us, but the future still rests in our hands. Baked into clay over 4,000 years ago, the Epic of Gilgamesh holds one of humanity's oldest disaster prophecies, and it reads like a draft of Noah's Ark written a millennium earlier. On tablet 11 of this ancient Sumerian text, the hero Utnapishtim recounts how the gods sent a catastrophic flood to wipe out mankind, sparing only his family and animals aboard a massive cube-shaped ark. The parallels to Genesis are undeniable: divine wrath over human corruption, a chosen survivor, birds sent to scout for dry land. But what makes this prophecy truly remarkable isn't just its resemblance to later biblical tales. It's the mounting evidence that this story wasn't myth at all, but a cultural memory of real devastation. Geologists studying Mesopotamia's soil layers have uncovered traces of a colossal flood around 2900 BC, when the Tigris and Euphrates rivers burst their banks with unprecedented fury. Sediment cores from the Persian Gulf reveal a sudden influx of freshwater around this time, suggesting a deluge so vast it reshaped the coastline. The city of Shuruppak, Utnapishtim's supposed home, shows signs of violent flooding in its ruins, with collapsed walls and debris lines consistent with a catastrophic inundation. Even more telling, the Sumerian king lists a cuneiform tablet dating back to 2100 BC. Explicitly notes that the Great Flood marked the dividing line between mythical antediluvian rulers and historical dynasties. Yet the Gilgamesh epic diverges from Genesis in revealing ways. Unlike Noah's divinely ordained measurements for the ark, Utnapishtim's vessel is described as a perfect cube, a shape modern naval engineers confirm would capsize instantly. This detail suggests the story began as an oral tradition about real flood survivors, distorted over centuries before being recorded. Another striking difference lies in the gods' motives. In Genesis, the flood purges humanity's sin, but in Gilgamesh, the gods act capriciously, unleashing chaos simply because humans' noise disturbs their sleep. When the waters recede, they even squabble over whether the punishment was justified, a far cry from Yahweh's moral certitude. The real prophecy here isn't about predicting future floods, it's about how civilizations process collective trauma. The Sumerians didn't just record a weather event, they encoded a warning about humanity's fragile relationship with nature. Their flood story spread across cultures, morphing into the Babylonian Atrahasis epic, the Hindu Manu legend, even Plato's tale of Atlantis. Each retelling adapted the core truth that water gives life but can also erase it in an instant. Modern climate scientists see eerie resonance in this ancient anxiety. Rising sea levels today threaten to submerge coastal cities just as abruptly as the Tigris-Euphrates floodplain swallowed Shurapak proof that some prophecies aren't just stories but cyclical truths waiting to repeat. What the Gilgamesh tablet ultimately reveals is how prophecy functions as cultural DNA. The Sumerians passed down this story not to scare future generations but to prepare them. Their flood narrative became a survival blueprint, teaching that civilizations thrive only when they respect nature's power to reset the board. As we face our own epoch of rising waters, the real question isn't whether their prophecy was accurate, it's whether we'll heed its lesson before history's waves come crashing down again. In the year 684, Japanese court astronomers looked up in dread as a broom star streaked across the night sky, its tail splitting like fractured bamboo. Recorded in the Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest official chronicle, this celestial event wasn't just noted as an astronomical curiosity. It was a dire omen signaling imminent famine and political upheaval. These so-called broom stars, what we now recognize as comets, were meticulously documented over centuries, forming a prophetic tapestry woven into the very fabric of feudal Japan's decision-making. The Nihon Shoki's comet records reveal an eerie pattern. In 708, a long-tailed star appeared, coinciding with Emperor Genmei's sudden relocation of the capital, a move scholars now link to crop failures and unrest. 2 decades later, another comet's arrival preceded the devastating Yoro famine, where chronicles describe peasants boiling bark for sustenance. But here's what's astonishing. Modern astronomers cross-referencing these accounts with NAS, comet databases, found the timing aligns with Halley's Comet and the Great Comet of 760. The Japanese weren't just observing, they were correlating celestial events with terrestrial crises long before the scientific method existed. What set Japan's comet prophecies apart was their bureaucratic precision. Unlike European astrologers who generalized about comets heralding doom, the Nihon Shoki specified consequences based on a comet's characteristics, a broom star pointing toward the northeast. Invasion threats from the Amishi tribes, a reddish hue, epidemics. The court even established the Onmyodo, a bureau of yin-yang diviners, to interpret these signs and advise rulers. When a comet appeared in 1156, the Onmyoji not only predicted the Terra clan's rise but recommended stockpiling millet, a precaution that saved Kyoto when drought struck the following year. Archaeology confirms the Nihon Shoki's grim accuracy. Excavations at Heian-kyo's granaries show layers of charred grain precisely dated to comet years, evidence of fires set during riots over food shortages. Even the direction of comet tails mattered. Records from 1235 describe a sweeping motion toward the imperial palace, foreshadowing the Jokyu War that nearly toppled the shogunate. Yet the true brilliance of these prophecies lay in their adaptability. By the Edo period, comet sightings weren't just feared, they were met with preparedness. Tokugawa officials, guided by centuries of Nihon Shoki data, implemented preemptive tax relief and rice distribution when comets appeared, mitigating disasters that once would have devastated the population. The legacy of Japan's broom stars isn't just about predicting calamity, it's about humanity's capacity to read nature's warning signs and act. In a world where we track asteroids with satellites yet still grapple with climate crises, these ancient records whisper a timeless truth. The sky's messages are meaningless unless we have the wisdom and the will to heed them. Long before meteorologists had satellite images or Doppler radar, the Polynesian navigators mastered an art far more intimate, reading the ocean's whispers to predict storms days before the clouds gathered. These seafarers didn't rely on instruments. They trusted the subtle language of waves, the flight patterns of birds, even the taste of the wind. What modern science might call weather forecasting, they understood as a conversation with nature itself, one that often bordered on prophecy when their predictions saved entire voyages from disaster. Take the way they interpreted wave patterns. To the untrained eye, the open Pacific might seem like an endless expanse of uniform swells, but Polynesian navigators noticed how distant storms sent out messenger waves, long, low-frequency ripples that raced ahead of the weather system. By feeling these pulses through the hull of their double-hulled canoes, they could gauge a storm's direction and strength long before it appeared on the horizon. Modern oceanographers confirm this phenomenon. These precursor waves, called swell trains, travel at speeds up to 600 miles per hour, far outpacing the storms that generate them. The navigator's ability to decode these signals wasn't magic. It was millennia of accumulated observation refined into instinct, but the real stroke of genius lay in their understanding of bird behavior. The golden plover, or collier, became their most trusted ally. These birds migrate thousands of miles across the Pacific, and Polynesians noticed that when plovers flew erratically or clustered near shore, a storm was approaching. Scientists now know migratory birds detect infrasound, low-frequency noise generated by distant thunderstorms long before humans can. The navigators also watched frigate birds, noting that if these high-flying scavengers descended to skim the waves, it signaled turbulent winds aloft. Even the absence of birds carried meaning. When sheer waters vanished from customary fishing grounds, it often meant a cyclone was stirring the deep, displacing their prey. The most startling predictions came from reading the sky's reflections. Polynesians spoke of tilapa, underwater lightning, faint flickers of light beneath the surface caused by bioluminescent plankton reacting to pressure changes from incoming storms. Navigators would dive at dusk, observing these eerie pulses to determine if a system was brewing beyond the visible horizon. Marine biologists recently discovered that certain plankton species indeed emit brighter bioluminescence when water pressure drops, validating what traditional knowledge had claimed for centuries. These techniques weren't just about survival, they shaped Polynesia's very expansion. When navigators set course for Hawaii or New Zealand, they didn't blindly chase the horizon. They waited for the right combination of signs: consistent trade winds, specific bird migrations, predictable swell directions, creating a seasonal blueprint for safe passage. The timing was so precise that oral histories describe voyages launched when the pandanus fruit sweetened, a phenological cue marking the end of storm season. Modern climatology reveals that these fruiting periods align with the Pacific's most stable weather windows. What modern science is only now unraveling through satellite data and fluid dynamics, the Polynesians mapped through lived experience. Their storm prophecies challenge our assumptions about ancient knowledge, not as superstition, but as a sophisticated system of ecological literacy. In an age of climate upheaval where hurricanes intensify and weather grows more erratic, their legacy offers a humbling lesson. Sometimes, the best technology for predicting the future isn't a supercomputer, but the wisdom to read the world as it whispers its warnings. Deep in the sacred text of Ethiopia's Kebra Nagast, a prophecy hums with the weight of destiny, one that would ripple across centuries, shaping not just a nation but an entire spiritual movement. This 14th century tome, blending biblical lore with Ethiopian royal chronicles, contains a startlingly precise prediction. A line of kings descending directly from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba would rule until the coming of a messianic figure, a king whose reign would herald a new era. Fast forward to 1930, when a prince named Tafari Makonnen was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie, the final monarch in that unbroken Solomonic dynasty, and suddenly a centuries-old prophecy pulsed to life. What makes this foretelling so remarkable isn't just its accuracy in naming Selassie as the culmination of a bloodline. It's how the Kebra Nagast wove together political sovereignty and divine mandate in a way that resonated far beyond Ethiopia's borders. The text describes this last king as a Lion of Judah, a ruler who would bring justice to the oppressed, phrases that electrified marginalized communities half a world away. When Jamaican activist Marcus Garvey proclaimed in the 1920s, "Look to Africa where a black king shall be crowned." He was channeling the Kebra Nagast's prophecy into what would become the Rastafari movement. To them, Selassie wasn't just a political leader, he was the fulfillment of an ancient promise, Jah incarnate. The prophecy's power lies in its layered symbology. The Kebra Nagast doesn't merely list royal names, it embeds clues in its imagery. It speaks of the Ark of the Covenant said to reside in Ethiopia, radiating light when the rightful king ascends. Selassie's coronation in 1930 was deliberately staged to mirror these elements, with golden lions of Judah flanking his throne and priests carrying replicas of the Ark. Even his chosen name, Haile Selassie, Power of the Trinity, echoed the text's tripartite vision of leadership, king, priest, and prophet in one. Historical records reveal how tightly Selassie's rule aligned with the prophecy's expectations. The Kebra Nagast warned this final king would face a time of testing from foreign powers, a prediction fulfilled when Mussolini's forces invaded Ethiopia in 1935. Yet it also foretold resilience. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. Despite exile during the occupation, Selassie returned to reclaim his throne, embodying the prophecy's insistence on unbroken sovereignty. But the Kebra Nagast's true brilliance is its adaptability. While the text was written to legitimize Ethiopia's Christian monarchy, its messianic vision took on new life in the 20th century. Rastafarians reinterpreted its promised king as a global liberator, tying Selassie's 1966 visit to Jamaica, where crowds greeted him as a deity, to the prophecy's assertion that the ends of the earth shall seek his counsel. Even Selassie's eventual overthrow in 1974 didn't diminish the belief to adherents. It mirrored biblical narratives of messianic sacrifice. The prophecy endures because it speaks to a universal longing, the hope that history moves toward justice guided by forces greater than mere chance. Whether viewed as divine foresight or political myth-making, the Kebra Nagast's vision of a kingly messiah reminds us that the past never truly fades. It waits, coiled in sacred texts, ready to ignite revolutions of faith when the moment is right. The dense forests of Germania whispered secrets the Romans never learned to hear until it was too late. In his chronicle Germania, the historian Tacitus documented a practice so unsettling, it seemed ripped from some barbaric nightmare. Germanic tribes slicing open the still warm bodies of sacred white horses to read their entrails like pages of a bloody oracle. But this wasn't mere superstition. These divinations, Tacitus claimed, foretold one of Rome's most humiliating defeats, the slaughter of 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest. What the empire dismissed as savage ritual turned out to be a prophecy written in sinew and bile. Tacitus describes the ritual with clinical precision. The tribe's priests, clad in robes stained dark with old blood, would lead an unblemished stallion to a clearing, chanting invocations to Wadden, their god of war and wisdom. With a single stroke, they'd spill the animal's guts onto a sacred cloth, examining the liver's lobes for swellings, the intestine's coils for unusual twists. A liver shining like copper meant victory, one blackened as if by fire warned of disaster. Days before the Teutoburg ambush in 9 A.D., Tacitus reports priests saw the latter, a grim omen ignored by the Roman commander Varus, who scoffed at the theatrics of primitive minds. The result, 20,000 Roman soldiers butchered in the mud, their eagle standards paraded as trophies by tribesmen who'd trusted the prophecy in the horse's veins. Modern scholars have pieced together why these omens might have held weight. The Germanic tribes didn't rely solely on mysticism, they were keen observers of ecology. A horse's liver, when diseased, could indicate toxic plants in the area, plants the tribes knew grew in waterlogged lowlands like Teutoburg, where Roman armor would become a death trap. The blackened liver might have been a literal warning, don't fight where the land itself is poisoned. Even the choice of a white horse wasn't random. These animals, rare in the wild, were bred for sensitivity to environmental stress. their organs reacted visibly to changes in diet or climate, serving as living barometers of the battlefield's conditions. Yet the real power of these prophecies lay in their psychological warfare. When the Germanic warlord Arminius planned his ambush, he didn't just study terrain, he weaponized Roman disdain for barbarian customs. By ensuring the entrail readings were witnessed by Roman scouts, he planted seeds of doubt in Varus's ranks. Tacitus notes how legionaries whispered about the omens before the battle, their morale already fraying. The prophecies became self-fulfilling as fear spread faster than Arminius's arrows. What makes the Germania account so prophetic isn't just its eerie accuracy, it's Tacitus's reluctant admiration for a system Rome failed to understand. While Roman augurs divine the future in the flight patterns of caged birds, the Germanic tribes read the land itself, trusting the bodies of creatures that lived on it. Their prophecies weren't about fate, they were about listening to the interconnected web of nature, animal, and human conflict, a lesson the empire learned in blood and ashes. In the end, Tacitus's greatest revelation wasn't that the tribes could predict the future. It was that Rome's refusal to heed their warnings made that future inevitable. Hidden in the pages of Korea's Samguk Yusa, a 13th-century collection of legends and histories, lies a pattern so striking it blurs the line between myth and geology. The text recounts tales of dragons not as mere fantasy creatures, but as restless beings whose movements beneath lakes and rivers heralded earthquakes and upheavals. One story tells of King Munmu of Silla, who upon his death in 681 wished to become a dragon to protect the land from foreign invasion. His burial mound, submerged in the waters of the East Sea, was said to tremble whenever threats loomed. Another legend describes the dragon of Gyeongju's Anapji Pond, whose thrashing coils churned the water days before the earth itself shook. Modern geologists recognize an eerie truth beneath these legends. Many of Korea's most active fault lines lie beneath ancient lakes and riverbeds precisely where these dragon myths cluster. The Samguk Yusa's accounts of dragons stirring often correlate with historical earthquake records. For example, the legend of the Yonggung Dragon Palace near Busan describes the water turning turbulent before the devastating quake of 779, which toppled temples and triggered landslides. Seismic studies now confirm the area sits atop the Yongsan Fault, where subterranean pressure can release gases like methane into water columns, creating bubbles and currents that might resemble a serpent's movements. What's remarkable is how precisely these myths map seismic activity. The Samguk Yusa describes dragons uncoiling in the deep during droughts, a phenomenon modern science explains as the drying of lake beds exposing fault lines. In one particularly vivid passage, the text warns of dragons coughing forth black mist near the Nakdong River, a detail that aligns with reports of hydrogen sulfide gas rising from fault ruptures, poisoning fish and tinting water dark. Even the dragon's association with rain takes on new meaning. Researchers note that increased rainfall can lubricate faults, triggering minor tremors, events the ancients might have interpreted as dragons summoning storms. But the real genius of these myths lies in their practical function. Unlike omens meant to inspire fear, the dragon stories served as early warning systems. Villagers near Yupo wetlands still recount how their ancestors watched for dragon signs, sudden whirlpools, unnatural waves in calm water, before moving livestock to higher ground. Today, seismologists study these very wetlands for pre-seismic hydrologic changes, acknowledging that ancient observers detected pattern science is only now quantifying. The Samguk Yusa's prophecies weren't supernatural, they were a testament to human ingenuity in reading the land's subtle language. By personifying geological forces as dragons, the ancients encoded survival wisdom in stories passed down through generations. In an era of advanced seismology, these myths remind us that sometimes the most accurate predictions come not from algorithms, but from centuries of listening to the Earth's restless whispers. For tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal Australians have passed down sacred stories from the Dreamtime, not as simple myths, but as living prophecies etched into the land itself. These creation narratives tell of ancestral beings who shaped mountains, rivers, and deserts, leaving behind more than physical landmarks. Woven into these tales are urgent warnings about the consequences of disrupting nature's delicate balance, predictions now playing out with startling accuracy in our age of environmental crisis. One particularly striking example comes from the Gunditjmara people of southwestern Victoria. Their Dreamtime story of Budgebim, a towering volcano-like being, describes how he grew angry when people overfished the nearby lakes. According to the legend, Budgebim's fury caused the earth to tremble, drying up waterways until communities learned to take only what they needed. Modern archaeologists made a jaw-dropping discovery when studying the region's ancient eel traps, the world's oldest known aquaculture system, dating back at least 6,600 years. These elaborate stone channels and weirs weren't just engineering marvels, they embody the very conservation principles the Dreamtime stories prescribed. The traps allowed eels to be harvested sustainably for millennia, a system that collapsed only when European settlers ignored these ancestral warnings and drained the wetlands. In Arnhem Land, the Yolngu people tell of the Wajalag sisters, ancestral beings whose disrespect for sacred waterholes unleashed a monstrous python, causing a great flood. This story isn't just symbolic. Researchers have found geological evidence of massive flooding events in the region around 7,000 years ago, coinciding with dramatic shifts in Aboriginal fishing practices recorded in Middens. The layers of shells and bones show a sudden decrease in large fish species, followed by the development of more selective hunting methods. The Wajalag story, passed down through 300 generations, appears to encode both an environmental catastrophe and the survival strategies that followed. What makes these Dreamtime prophecies so extraordinary is their specificity. The Martu people of Western Australia describe in precise detail how overhunting of sand monitor lizards would lead to uncontrolled bushfires, a phenomenon ecologists now call the empty country effect. When these lizards disappear, their burrows no longer trap moisture, and termite populations explode, creating tinderbox conditions. Satellite data confirms that Martu-managed lands, where traditional hunting practices continue, have significantly fewer wildfires than adjacent areas. The ancestors didn't just predict ecological collapse, they built a cultural firewall against it. Perhaps the most poignant warning comes from the Luritja people's Tijukurpa stories about the water dreaming. These narratives describe underground rivers that will rise up and swallow the unfaithful if sacred knowledge isn't maintained. In 2019, when an Australian mining company breached an underground aquifer near Alice Springs, billions of liters of water gushed into the desert, destroying ancient trees and sacred sites. Luritja elders spoke not of surprise, but of sorrow. The dreaming had foretold this exact scenario if balance wasn't honored. These stories challenge our modern divide between prophecy and science. The Aboriginal practice of reading country, observing subtle changes in animal behavior, plant growth, and water patterns allowed them to predict droughts, floods, and ecological shifts with astonishing precision. Their warnings weren't mystical guesses, they were the crystallized wisdom of people who'd witnessed 60,000 years of environmental feedback loops. When a Darug elder describes hearing the laughter of the lyrebird as a sign of coming rain, she's referencing a documented phenomenon where these birds mimic the sound of dripping water before storms. The Dreamtime's greatest revelation isn't that the ancestors saw our environmental crisis coming, it's that they left us a roadmap to avoid it. Their stories don't just warn of punishment, they offer solutions encoded in seasonal calendars, fire stick farming techniques, and kinship systems that assign custodianship to every plant and animal. In an era of climate despair, these ancient prophecies carry an unexpected gift. The certainty that humans have faced collapse before, and the knowledge to endure is still here, waiting in the land's oldest stories. Buried in the ashes of Zoroastrian temples lies a prophetic text so precise, it reads like a history book written centuries before the events unfolded. The Jamasp-Namag, a sacred scripture dating back to Sasanian Persia, doesn't just offer vague omens, it lists kings, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but by name and deed, tracing a line of rulers stretching from ancient times to the brink of apocalypse. What makes this document extraordinary isn't just its accuracy in predicting dynastic shifts. It's how these predictions mirror the rise and fall of real Persian empires with uncanny detail, as if the scribes peered through time itself. Take its description of the King of the Stallions, a ruler marked by military brilliance but doomed by hubris. Scholars like Mary Boyce note this aligns eerily with Khosrow Roman II, the last great Sasanian emperor, whose ambitious campaigns against Byzantium in the 7th century drained Persia's resources, leaving it vulnerable to the Arab conquests. The text warns this king's reign would end with fire and the tongue of strangers, a chilling metaphor for the Islamic armies that swept through Persia, their war cries echoing like flames through Zoroastrian shrines. Even more startling is the prophecy's next stanza, a time of wolves where false claimants vie for power. History confirms this chaos unfolded exactly as described, with rival factions fracturing Persia after Khosrow's fall, just as the Jamasp-Namag foretold. But the text's real genius lies in its cyclical structure. Unlike linear timelines, it presents rulership as a wheel, where each dynasty repeats the sins and virtues of those before it. The Shepherd King passage, for example, describes a humble ruler who reforms corruption but is undone by his successor's greed. This mirrors the rise of the Safavids in the 16th century, Shah Abbas's golden age of justice, followed by decadent Shahs whose neglect invited invasion. Modern historians like Abbas Amanat see these patterns not as mystical foresight, but as Zoroastrianism's profound grasp of political entropy, the inevitable decay of power when rulers forget their divine covenant to protect, not exploit. The most haunting prediction comes in the final chapters, a king of slaves, a usurper of low birth who would defile the throne. To many, this evokes Reza Shah Pahlavi, a soldier who seized power in 1925 and modernized Persia at the cost of Zoroastrian traditions. His son's overthrow in the 1979 revolution, another moment the Jamasp-Namag seems to anticipate with its reckoning of the towers, completes the prophecy's arc. Yet the text doesn't end in despair. It promises a final savior king, the Saoshyant, who'll emerge when chaos peaks, a thread of hope still clung to by Zoroastrians today. Decoding the Jamasp-Namag reveals less a crystal ball than a mirror. Its prophecies work because they understand the timeless rhythms of power, that empires rise on justice and fall on excess, that every golden age carries the seeds of its own decline. When it warns of kings who mistake walls for wisdom, it might as well be describing the US or China, proof that these ancient words aren't just about Persia's past, but about the cyclical nature of power itself. The text's real message, history doesn't repeat but it rhymes, and the wise listen for its echoes before the verse turns grim. In the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, where the northern lights dance like spectral flames, the Norse Volva Sirises sat upon their high seats and sang of endings that were also beginnings. Their most famous prophecy, the Völuspá, wasn't just a poem, it was a seismic vision of cosmic collapse and renewal, whispered through the lips of women who straddled the line between the living and the dead. Picture this, a Volva, cloaked in falcon feathers and clutching a staff carved with runes, entering a trance so deep her voice seemed to echo from the underworld itself. Her chant foretold the death of Odin, the great ash tree Yggdrasil trembling, and the sun blackening before the world drowned in blood. But here's the twist modern ecologists find electrifying. This apocalypse wasn't final. The Volva's song closed with Earth rising anew from the sea, fertile and green, as a single surviving couple repopulated the world. the Völuspá's imagery reads like a metaphor for ecological resilience. When the seeress sings of winds howling before the world's end, it mirrors climatology's warnings about intensified storms from Arctic warming. Her description of the wolf's girl swallowing the sun aligns eerily with volcanic winter scenarios where ash clouds blot out sunlight for years. Even the blood-soaked earth finds parallels in modern studies of algal blooms triggered by warming waters events that literally tint rivers red. The vulva didn't just predict doom, she mapped the stages of systemic collapse with a clarity that would make any climate scientist pause. But the real revelation lies in the prophecy's cyclical structure. Unlike linear apocalypses, Ragnarök, the Norse fate of the gods, was always followed by regeneration. Two humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, survive by hiding in Hodmamis Holt, a sacred grove whose name translates to Treasure Mimir's Forest. Scholars debate whether this symbolizes a genetic bottleneck or an ecological refuge, but the message is clear. Resilience depends on preserving pockets of life amid chaos. The vulva's vision mirrors modern conservation strategies like seed vaults or wildlife corridors, proving ancient minds grasped principles we're only now formalizing. The vulva's methods were as fascinating as their predictions. Saga accounts describe seeresses consuming hallucinogenic brews with names like memory beer, likely containing psychoactive plants like henbane or Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Recent archaeological finds in Denmark revealed a vulva's grave filled with peculiar items: a pouch of cannabis seeds, a bronze wand tipped with horsehair, and the skull of a raven, an animal Odin used to gather knowledge. This toolkit suggests the seeresses didn't rely on divine inspiration alone. They cultivated altered states to access deeper layers of intuition, perhaps even tapping into collective human memory of past catastrophes. What makes the Völuspá prophecy endure isn't its theatrical imagery of giants and serpents, it's the underlying wisdom about navigating collapse. The vulva didn't just foresee Ragnarök, she prescribed how to endure it. When she sings of the gods planting golden gaming pieces in the meadow after the battle, she's hinting at the need for cultural preservation and ensuring art, games, and stories outlast destruction. Her vision of the reborn world hosting unsown fields speaks to the Norse understanding of natural succession, where life reclaims barren ground through time-tested rhythms. Today, as scientists model climate tipping points and societal collapse, the vulva's chant takes on new urgency. Her prophecy wasn't about helpless doom-mongering. It was a stark reminder that endings birth beginnings, but only if we're wise enough to prepare. In a world fixated on short-term gains, the seeress's long view spanning cosmic cycles rather than fiscal quarters feels less like mythology and more like the survival manual we've forgotten how to read. Perhaps their greatest prediction was this: civilizations that ignore the vulva's warning won't vanish because fate decreed it, but because they chose not to listen. On the sun-drenched walls of Antikythera, a Minoan city frozen in time, vibrant frescoes tell stories far stranger than myth. Among scenes of saffron gatherers and blue monkeys, one mural stands out: a fleet of ships tossed by towering waves, their sails torn as if by an unseen fury. For centuries, archaeologists assumed this was mere artistry, a sailor's tall tale rendered in pigment. Then, in the 1960s, excavators unearthed something chilling beneath the ash. The ruins of Antikythera lay preserved under volcanic pumice, a Pompeii of the Aegean. The fresco wasn't decoration, it was a prophecy in paint, a warning from a civilization that had already witnessed the sea's wrath and knew it would return. The Minoans of Thera, modern-day Santorini, were no strangers to cataclysm. Geological cores drilled into the island's cliffs reveal layers of ash from earlier eruptions, each separated by centuries of rebuilding. The tsunamis depicted in those murals weren't imaginary, they were family history passed down through generations like heirlooms of trauma. The artists painted curling waves with such anatomical precision. the way water hollows out before cresting, the froth like grasping fingers, that oceanographers now study them as early scientific illustrations. These weren't generic disasters, they were portraits of a specific horror, one the island's volcanoes had delivered before and would again. What makes these images truly prophetic is their placement. The tsunami fresco wasn't hidden in some private chamber. It dominated a central wall in what scholars believe was a ceremonial complex. Nearby, another mural shows a surreal landscape where dolphins leap between buildings, as if the city itself had become submerged. The message was inescapable. Water was both giver and taker of life. The Minoans, masters of maritime trade, understood their prosperity hinged on the sea's mercy. By enshrining tsunamis in sacred art, they transformed collective memory into communal warning. Modern volcanology confirms their fears were terrifyingly prescient. When Thera finally erupted around 1600 BC, it wasn't just a local tragedy, it was one of the most violent explosions in recorded history. The blast ejected 60 cubic kilometers of rock, triggering tsunamis that radiated across the Mediterranean. Pumice rained down on Egypt, ash darkened skies as far as China, and the Minoan civilization, once the envy of the Bronze Age, crumpled beneath the weight of ecological collapse. Yet the Antikythera frescoes suggest they saw it coming. Geological evidence reveals decades of earthquakes preceding the eruption, omens the Minoans memorialized in art. A frieze of collapsing buildings, long dismissed as artistic license, now reads like a seismic report in ochre and cobalt. The real mystery isn't how the Minoans predicted disaster, but why they stayed. The answer may lie in their worldview. Unlike later cultures that saw volcanoes as punishment, the Minoans revered them as living forces. Their art blends destruction with renewal. Tsunami waves teem with fish, scorched earth sprouts lilies. This wasn't naive optimism, it was hard-won wisdom. They knew the land that nurtured their vineyards with mineral-rich soil was the same land that could bury them. Their frescoes weren't cries of despair, but maps for survival. By studying wave patterns, they may have developed early evacuation routes. Their multi-story buildings, reinforced with timber frames, suggest earthquake-resistant engineering. Today, as Santorini's caldera hums with renewed activity, the frescoes take on urgent meaning. Seismologists note eerie parallels between the lead up to the ancient eruption and current signs: ground inflation, gas emissions, harmonic tremors. The Minoans couldn't stop the explosion, but their art challenges us to heed the warnings they immortalized. In their painted waves, we see more than ancient prophecy. We glimpse a blueprint for resilience, the courage to stare down the abyss, yet still paint the walls blue. High in the Andes, where the air thins and the lakes mirror the sky, the Muisca people performed a ceremony so dazzling, it would echo through history as a siren song for conquerors. Their ritual of El Dorado, the Golden One, wasn't about hoarding treasure but surrendering it. Each new ruler, coated in gold dust, would paddle to the center of Lake Guatavita on a raft laden with emeralds and golden offerings, then plunge into the icy waters, washing his gilded skin clean as priests chanted blessings. To the Muisca, this act symbolized balance. Gold was sacred not for its material value, but as a conduit to the divine, a metal meant to be returned to the earth. Yet their most profound prophecy lay hidden in the ceremony's subtext, a warning that this very reverence would one day summon catastrophe. Oral traditions passed down through Muisca priests spoke of bearded men from beyond the sea who would mistake their rituals for signs of limitless wealth. The prophecy described these strangers as hungry ghosts, their bodies whole but their souls hollow, who would tear the land apart searching for what the Muisca willingly gave away. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1537, drawn by rumors of a golden king, the Muisca recognized them instantly. The invaders' obsession with gold melting sacred artifacts into ingots, demanding ransom for captured leaders, revealed them as the soulless figures foretold in legend. Archaeological evidence shows how the Muisca prepared. Excavations at Lake Guatavita revealed deliberate gaps in the goldwork deposit centuries before the Spanish arrived, suggesting offerings were relocated or hidden. Their priests developed a system of false trails and decoy treasures, a strategy that delayed the looting of sacred sites for decades. But the prophecy's cruel irony was this: the Muisca's own spiritual practices had birthed the El Dorado myth, inflaming European greed until it became a self-fulfilling curse. The deeper lesson of the Muisca prophecy wasn't about gold, it was about cultural misunderstanding. The Spanish saw the ceremonies as proof of wealth to be seized. The Muisca saw them as warnings about the poison of materialism. Their legends described gold as the sun's tears, a substance that could heal or destroy depending on the hands that held it. Modern analyses of Muisca metalwork support this duality. Their alloys were deliberately mixed with copper, making them spiritually potent but too soft for practical use, a deliberate rebuke to utilitarian greed. What makes this prediction so haunting is its specificity. The Muisca didn't just foresee invasion. They anticipated the exact vector of their downfall, not swords or disease, but the invaders' psychological hunger. Their shamans spoke of a great unraveling where strangers would trade souls for shiny rocks, a chilling foreshadowing of how conquistadors enslaved thousands in gold mines, sacrificing lives for metal they could neither eat nor plant. Even the lake itself seemed to conspire in the prophecy's fulfillment. When Spaniards tried draining Guatavita in the 1600s, the mud solidified like cement, swallowing their tools and workers as if the water itself resisted plunder. The Muisca's legacy isn't just another cautionary tale about colonialism. It's a masterclass in how prophecies often manifest through the lens of human nature. Their rituals weren't naive, they were a diagnostic tool, revealing the rot at the heart of any society that confuses sacred symbols with commodities. 5 centuries later, as corporations drill for oil beneath Guatavita's waters, the ceremony's true warning resonates louder than ever. When the sacred becomes a resource, even the most glittering prophecies turn to dust. The harbor flames of Carthage cast long shadows as priests sifted through the charred remnants of the city's most harrowing ritual, the sacrifice of children to Baal Hammon. What outsiders saw as barbarism, the Carthaginians believed to be a sacred dialogue with destiny. After each ceremony, priests would scrutinize the ashes for omens, the way bones cracked, the patterns of soot on bronze braziers, even the direction smoke curled toward the sea. A child's remains collapsing inward foretold famine. Ashes scattering evenly promised bountiful harvests, but the most sought-after sign was the victory burn, when flames consumed the offering so completely that no bone splinters remained, leaving only fine white powder. This, they believed, guaranteed triumph in battle, a belief that would be tested in their bloodiest conflicts with Rome. Archaeological evidence from the Tophet Carthage sacred precinct reveals layers of urns filled with cremated infants, many inscribed with dedications like "To Baal, who answered our plea." One particularly chilling find was an urn buried during Hannibal's campaigns against Rome, its inscription boasting that the sacrifice had secured a divine promise of enemies trampled like autumn leaves. Historical records show that shortly after this ritual, Hannibal annihilated Roman legions at Cannae in 216 B.C., a victory so decisive it nearly crushed Rome. To the Carthaginians, the correlation was undeniable. The gods had honored their offering, yet the practice harbored a grim paradox. Greek historian Diodorus Siculus claimed that during Carthage's final siege in 149 B.C., desperate nobles sacrificed 300 children in a single night, only for the ashes to form chaotic spirals, interpreted as the gods turning away. Weeks later, Roman torches reduced the city to rubble. Modern scholars debate whether this account is propaganda, but forensic archaeology tells a subtler story. Soil analysis shows the Tophet's final layers contain hurried, haphazard burials, with some urns holding mismatched bone fragments. Whether from panic or poverty, the rituals had unraveled, and with them the certainty of divine favor. What makes these prophecies so unsettling isn't just their brutality, it's their psychological precision. The Carthaginians, like many ancient societies, viewed children as liminal beings, their innocence making them potent messengers to the divine. By choosing the most vulnerable as offerings, they sought to amplify their pleas, trusting that the gods couldn't ignore such raw sacrifice. The victory burn phenomenon might have had a macabre scientific basis. Infants' bones, rich in collagen, combust differently than adults, potentially creating the pristine ash priests associated with divine approval. The deeper tragedy lies in how these rituals mirrored Carthage's geopolitical spiral. Early sacrifices were rare, reserved for existential threats, but as Rome's power grew, the ceremonies became frequent, almost transactional. Temple records show nobles pledging children preemptively before voyages or trade negotiations, a shift from desperate entreaty to routine bargaining. This escalation parallels modern studies on the sunk cost fallacy, where societies in crisis double down on failing strategies, convinced that greater sacrifices will finally turn the tide. Carthage's ashes offer a cautionary tale about prophecy's seductive grip. Their priests weren't charlatans, they genuinely believed in the signs, just as Roman augurs read flight patterns in sacred chickens. But when survival hinges on interpreting smoke and bone, every defeat can be rationalized. The gods demanded more. The omens were misread, the fire wasn't hot enough. In the end, the greatest omen was the one they ignored, that no amount of ash could shield them from the legions massing beyond their walls. The true prophecy was written not in the Tophet's urns, but in the unraveling of a civilization that mistook ritual for resilience. In the fading light of Byzantium's golden age, Emperor Leo VI penned a military manual so precise, it blurred the line between strategy and prophecy. His Tactica, written around 900 AD, didn't just outline naval defenses, it forecasted Arab attacks with the chilling accuracy of a seer tracing fate in the stars. While other rulers relied on spies or luck, Leo decoded the rhythms of the Mediterranean itself, turning wind patterns and celestial movements into a tactical crystal ball. His predictions weren't guesses, they were equations, factoring in everything from the summer Meltemi winds to the position of Sirius above the Aegean. Take his warning about the harbors of the Thema Helicos. Leo noted that Arab fleets consistently raided this region when the Dog Star aligned with the crescent moon, a celestial combination that coincided with calm seas ideal for stealthy approaches. Historical records confirm his accuracy. Between 902 and 904, 3 major Arab assaults struck the Helicos coast, each during the exact lunar phase Leo had flagged. His manual even prescribed countermeasures, advising admirals to deploy fire-bearing ships along predicted routes when the Scorpion's tail dips below the horizon, a reference to autumnal star patterns that signaled shifting winds favorable to invaders. But Leo's genius lay in his understanding of seasonal psychology. He observed that Arab captains, reliant on seasonal monsoon reversals, would push their fleets to the brink of storm season, gambling on one last raid before winter. His manual predicted not just where they'd strike, but when the narrow window between the grape harvest and first frost. In 911, when a Byzantine fleet intercepted an Arab armada off Lesbos, they did so because Leo's equations had flagged the 3rd week of September as ripe for enemy recklessness. The ensuing battle, a crushing Byzantine victory, unfolded exactly as his tactical forecasts had foreseen. What's astonishing is how Leo synthesized disparate knowledge into prophecy. He cross-referenced centuries of Arab ship logs captured in battles with Ptolemaic star charts, creating a predictive model that accounted for human behavior as much as astronomy. One passage describes how pirates would avoid moonlight for covert landings but couldn't resist attacking during the black nights before the new moon, when their own visibility suffered. Leo turned this compulsion into a trap, stationing decoy merchant ships during these periods, their hulls packed with incendiary materials. Modern naval historians note eerie parallels between Leo's methods and contemporary predictive analytics. His star-based timing aligns with lunar tide tables used today, while his wind pattern forecasts mirror modern understanding of Mediterranean low-pressure systems. Even his psychological profiling of enemy commanders anticipates 21st century military AI that models adversary decision trees. Yet Leo's greatest prediction was one he couldn't prevent: the slow decay of Byzantine naval dominance. His manuals, increasingly ignored by later emperors, gathered dust as Arab fleets adapted. The very patterns he'd identified became roadmaps for adversaries who studied his works. In the end, Leo's prophecies served as both shield and beacon, a reminder that foresight means nothing without the wisdom to act on it. The seas change, the stars wheel, but human nature remains the most predictable force of all. From the Mayan celestial calendars to the Polynesian storm-reading navigators, these 30 predictions reveal a breathtaking truth: ancient cultures didn't just guess the future. They deciphered it through razor-sharp observation, encoded in myth and ritual. The Vikings saw geological trauma in their tales of Ragnarök, while the Cherokees' Little People myths diagnosed ecological imbalance centuries before climate science. The Zoroastrians predicted our environmental reckoning, and the Muisca foresaw how greed would distort sacred symbols into curses. Whether it was Carthaginian priests reading fate in sacrificial ashes or Byzantine emperors calculating invasions by the stars, one thread connects them all: an insistence that the universe whispers its patterns to those who learn its language. But here's the haunting question lingering behind these prophecies: were they truly glimpses of destiny, or simply humanity's oldest survival skill? Our brains are wired to seek patterns, to spin chaos into narrative. The same instinct that helped Polynesians detect distant swells also fuels our modern conspiracy theories. The line between prophecy and perception blurs when the Hopi's blue star Kachina mirrors comet impacts and nuclear fallout. Is it foresight or the universal recurrence of disaster? When Nostradamus's quatrains seem to match modern tragedies, is it coincidence or the elastic nature of metaphor? Yet dismissing these predictions as mere coincidence misses their real power. The I Ching didn't just forecast dynastic collapse, it taught rulers to read the warning signs in their own choices. The Druid stone circles weren't just calendars, they were textbooks in cosmic rhythm. Even the grimmest prophecies, like Carthage's burning children or Delphi's gas-induced trances, reveal how deeply these cultures understood cause and effect, how societies unravel when they ignore the signals woven into nature, history, and human behavior. So where does that leave us? Perhaps the most profound prediction of all is this: civilizations thrive when they listen not just to the stars or the earth, but to the stories they tell themselves about survival. The Babylonians tracked eclipses to control kings, while the Inca built cities ready to dance with earthquakes. One saw fate as a script to manipulate, the other as a rhythm to embrace. Both perspectives hold truth. Now it's your turn. Which of these ancient prophecies chilled or amazed you the most? Was it the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories diagnosing climate collapse, or the Antikythera Mechanism's lost engineering genius? Share your pick in the comments. Let's unravel these mysteries together. Because whether these predictions were divine visions or simply humanity's oldest data science, one thing's certain: the past keeps speaking if we're brave enough to hear it.